Good evening. I'm Billy. I'm an alcoholic. Good to see everybody. Mr. R, good to see you. Um, my home group, most importantly, is a primary purpose group in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. We meet 7 a.m., 7 days a week, 6 days a week, literature based. One day we have a speaker meeting. My sobriety date's January the 5th of 1990. Um, I laugh when people say things about speaking. What I know about getting sober young is that if you asked me to do a workshop on my top 100 mistakes in life, I still wouldn't be back to my drinking time. So let's just level the playing field like right there. Okay. Um, it's funny because I just came in, I was with this young kid who 3 weeks ago, I don't know how much it shows now, but I had to have some complicated eye/skin cancer surgery. And of course, the night that I had it, this lunatic, calls me from the Palm Beach County Jail. I hadn't seen him in like 6 days at the meeting where he was supposed to be. Um, and, it's very freeing, I think, sometimes to stay sober, um, and be able to look back on life because honestly, I'm just going to be honest. I really don't care how anyone does AA. I care how I do it. And as I tell him all the time, I didn't invite myself into his life. He invited me into his life. Like I'm pretty good about that there's two kinds of business in my life, my business and none of my business. And the more that's none of my business, the better. I have an internal problem that I sometimes confuse what's not my business for my business. And for what should be my business, I'm then irresponsible about. But um, I've had this conversation with him a million times. Like, you invited me in. Like, other than that, I would mind my own business. I would just watch you vape and drink monsters on the back porch of the clubhouse and do nothing and get arrested again. And that's your choice. Like, it's none of my business until you invite me in. And, I am so grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, I never meant to live this long, but here I am. And not only did I never mean to live this long, but I never wanted to be this old, you know? Um, but it happens. It happens. Um, if you're new here tonight, I don't know who's new, but if there is anyone who's new, I just want to make sure that I be very clear. If you hate Alcoholics Anonymous, I will guarantee you that you might hate it as much as I once did, but not more. Like, not more. You could not possibly hate AA more than I hated it at a certain time in my life. And all I can hope for you, like somebody said, maybe the speaker's not your cup of tea. Here's a good psychiatric diagnosis. If I am your cup of tea, you should get a therapist tomorrow. Okay. How's that? Right. Um, everything I have in my life, everything is a direct result of Alcoholics Anonymous or the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon Family Groups and Alateen. That's just the truth. I I'm a chronic teenage alcoholic for sure. There are a lot of other people in AA who you hear say there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and a head full of AA. That's not my story. My story is there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and my mother's head full of Al-Anon. That is a much worse combination, much worse. In fact, because I came to my first AA meeting at 14 years old, and because from 14 to 23, I was a disaster. When you go to your first AA meeting at 14 and you spend a lot of time in juvenile probation and, you meet people in AA, Truthfully, there was a time in my life when because I'm a bar drinker. I love bars. Um, I loved sitting down at a bar with someone I knew from AA who, like me, was not serious and talking about what losers you people are and how there's no way I'm going to have this pathetic kind of two and a half kids, a wife, two cars in a driveway, some horrible job, come home after work. Like, I had a much more exciting life plan for myself. So I used to love lining up drinks with people I met in AA. And, you know, I don't come from a family, obviously I'm Irish Catholic. I have 42 first cousins. That doesn't make me an alcoholic. I've had to learn the hard way that it did teach me a lot of other horrible things, that my DNA is completely tragic in a lot of other ways, but it does not make me an alcoholic. It did not give me the physical allergy and the mental obsession and the spiritual malady. Truthfully, the best I've heard it described is a speaker who's passed away now, Sandy B. Like, I'm his story, you know? When my mother had me, the nurse should have said, Mrs. N, we're going to take your son to another side of the hospital called the detox. And it's going to save you like 20 years of pain and suffering and tragedy. That's what should have happened with me. Like, I'm as alcoholic today as I was back then. Um, I grow up in a family that, number one, does not believe in alcoholism. And so if you're new, I just want to stress to you that even though your family loves you, and even though your friends love you, and maybe your coworkers love you, if they're not in a 12-step fellowship or Al-Anon, they do not understand what you suffer from. They only understand what the outside world tells them, which, as we know, is complete rubbish and useless for us. But if you're new, you know, I want you to know that I come from a family that doesn't believe in this disease. And I think about that sometimes because in my childhood, it was very common for me to be in a car with my mother or my father, and out of nowhere for them to pull over on the side of the road or in a parking lot. I would say take off their seatbelt, but no one wore seatbelts then. Uh, but they would pull over, they would put the car in park, and they would look at me and say, Billy, get your head out of your ass. Why can't you be like all the other kids? Why do you have to take things so far? Why can't you drink like the other kids? And I think about that because when I was about 10 years sober, I had the privilege of taking my mom to a lot of chemotherapy and radiation. And it was like one of the first times that her bad son became useful, because I would stop at the deli and buy her a pack of Kent 100s because who cares? Like, it's not time to stop smoking, mom. Like, it's stage 4. You're going to be in the hospice shortly. And my other goody goody siblings would never buy cigarettes for my mother. But I think about, imagine as I was driving her there, if I pulled over on the side of the road and put the car in park and said, Mom, this cancer thing, it's all smoke and mirrors. Why don't you just get your head out of your ass? Why don't you just act right? Like, it's amazing that people told me that about my drinking and my alcoholism. Like, I heard somebody say it a long time ago, and it's my story too. People have been asking me my whole life, Billy, why do you drink the way you do? I just didn't know the answer to the question. Now I do. If I knew the answer to the question, it would have been a lot easier to deal with all these people because the answer is very simple. If you knew how I feel sober, you would never ask me why I drink the way I do. Ever. You would never ask me. If you could understand what my life is like sober, you would never have to ask me again. And I grew up in a family that doesn't believe in this disease. And I grew up with a dad that believes that, especially men in AA, are losers, quitters, surrendered their man card. And, when you grow up in a family with 42 Irish Catholic first cousins, it means that like every weekend is a revolving door of first communions, confirmations, christenings, baptisms, graduations, right? Every weekend. You're at another aunt and uncle's house or grandparents' house. And the best thing I can tell you about them is that they all ended the same way, like a Cops episode. That's how they all end, okay, when my family gets together. They end with my mother or one of my aunts screaming at my dad or one of my uncles, holding a child that's in half like pajamas and half day clothes that should have been in bed hours ago. That's how they end. If there is such a thing as alcoholic math, based on what I witnessed as a child, I should have never drank. And I'm a pretty unfortunate, too logical a person. It's caused me a lot of problems, and I'll get to that. But I knew alcohol around my family was a disaster. Now, here's the double-edged sword of that. And now I have the gift or you know, I'm not 16 days sober anymore. I'm 35 years sober. I've spent 77% of my life in or around AA and 62% of it sober. And, you know, one of the hardest things I had to learn, but I've learned in my work life because I wound up running a couple of big companies, is drunk people do dumb things. I don't know if you all know that, but you don't have to be an alcoholic. Like drunk people do stupid, stupid things. I just spoke up in a place called Burlington, Ontario, um, like near Hamilton or Oakville or something like that. But I was telling the crowd that at a certain point in my professional career, I banned everybody that works for me on business trips to Detroit from going to a place called Windsor. Like bad things happen in Windsor, Ontario, really bad things. It's a place that's like a magnet for somebody like me. If you've ever seen the movie Bad Santa, the reason I love it so much is because I love bad everything. I love the bad baseball players. I love bad cops. I love bad firefighters, bad teachers. There's nothing the way I'm wired ever appreciates that something could be good and yet fun. That's just my natural DNA. But it's been a great life lesson to learn that, and it's sometimes difficult when I talk to a new person because I live in the treatment center capital of the world in South Florida. I don't want to talk about their last DWI or Narcan or their kids were taken away or they got arrested for fighting with a cop again or they crashed another car. Because I have to let them know that lots of people do those things that are not alcoholic. Lots of people. You get drunk, you do something stupid. Like I just never took the time to learn about the physicalology and the mental obsession. I never, I just, the truth is, when I was a teenager, and I don't want to offend anyone here because I could be describing somebody, but if I saw you get out of your car in the church parking lot with your own big book, I knew you were a lunatic. Okay. And if I saw you get out of your car with your own big book with like some leather cover with like your name stamped in it, with like a spot in the right hand corner for your sobriety coin, I knew you were the Taliban. I knew you were somebody I would never talk to in AA. Like that you were just this over the top, passionate AA's your whole pathetic life. I had no time for that. And because of where I come from, I can't tell you what my first drink was. Was it a beer with my dad at a Jets game? Could have been. Is a possibility. Was it a beer with my dad at a Yankees game? It could have been. I mean, the only thing I think about those games back then is that's when the people who came out to sell beer still had the cans and poured it in front of you. I don't know if any of you remember that. And they would have a can opener, they would pop it on both sides so that it poured quickly. But so I don't know what my first drink was. I knew that my first real resentment in life before I knew what a resentment was against my dad. And not because he left. It was because he left me with this Al Anon lunatic. And now he had a place to drink in peace and quiet in this like bachelor apartment. And he left her with me. And leading up to that, a couple of things I'll just tell you that are important to know is that I grew up before cable TV, like it came out when I was in high school, right? So our TV had four channels. I grew up without Xbox or Game Boy. I think Atari came out when I was in junior high. But my family was a disaster. My dad and my mother were disasters. My dad, an out of control, violent, undercover narcotics agent, alcoholic. My mom, most of my childhood, an untreated Al Anon and untreated codependent. And um, the only way to escape the madness for me was to read. Reading was my escape. And I read whatever I could get my hands on. Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, my mother's Good Housekeeping, the encyclopedia, all kinds of things like that. And, um, when you've heard a lot of fifth steps and you deal with a lot of alcoholics, like I know what makes me an alcoholic. I already told you. It's not the car crashes and the fights. It's the medical estimate of alcoholism, as Dr. Silkworth calls it. That when I take a drink, I can't stop. Analogy kicks in and I keep going. And worse than that, when I'm completely physically sober, I'm so uncomfortable in my own skin that I start to believe that the allergy is a fantasy that you people made up to scare me. Um, but you get to know a lot about alcoholics, and there's a lot of things that run in our DNA. They might not make us an alcoholic, but they sure are common in our little family tree here. Um, I'll tell you a few about me that are, again, not a good psychiatric report. But these are true about me from as early as I can remember. If you tell me not to do something, I'm going to do it. You can place a bet on it. If you tell me I have to do something without telling me a legitimate reason to do it, I ain't never doing it. If you tell me not to go somewhere, I am definitely going there. And probably the worst one of them all, if you tell me not to hang out with a particular boy or girl because they're the bad kids, then I know that God put those people on earth for me to hang out with. Okay. So, right before junior high, a couple of things happened that shaped my life. I got caught cheating on a test. Now, I already gave the disclaimer about Al Anon. I love Al Anon. So, if you're an Al Anon, I love it. but I'm a teenage chronic alcoholic. I don't know if you've ever had your mother go to Al-Anon, but let me describe it. If you've watched any of the new kind of CIA movies, when a van goes down the street and the side door opens and two guys put a hood over a person and throw him in the van, like that's what they did to my mother. And then they brought her back. She looked the same, but she was not the same. They destroyed the mother that I loved, the enabler, the mother that explained to teachers and principals that if they only got a chance to know her son like she does, they would realize he's just often misunderstood, but that he really is a good kid. Like Al-Anon, they assassinated that mother. They dropped a mother off who knew things like boundaries and detaching with love and not getting in the way of the bottom that God had planned for her oldest son. All this hocus pocus mumbo jumbo. When my mother would come home, if when it would start at the kitchen table with, I was talking to the ladies, I knew I was about to hear something I was not going to like. Like I knew it. And I got caught cheating on this test. And here's the truth: I didn't cheat on the test. The teacher, there could be a social worker in here. Again, another apology. I love social workers. But I'm a 59-year-old man who's never been invited to a meeting with a social worker where I got good news, ever, in my whole life history. If a social worker is in the room, it means that I'm going to be told something I don't want to hear. And so I'm in the principal's office with the school social worker and my teacher and my mother. And I don't have no answers written up my sleeve, no cheat sheet in my pocket. The teacher just said to my mother that there's no way I could have gotten a perfect score on that test based on the way I behave in school, based on the way I behave in the cafeteria, which is probably pretty good logic, but it just wasn't true in my case. You see, one of the bad discoveries I had at the end of elementary school was that I knew I remembered everything I read. Like I not only remembered it, I remembered what part of the page it was on, top, bottom, middle, right, left indentation. And I knew I could do complicated math in my head and very complicated math on a small piece of paper. Now, I don't tell you that to brag, because when I make a discovery like that in life, I use it for the most socially unredeeming activities possible. I do not use it for anything good. And right after that incident, one of those kids who my mother told me never to hang out with invited me to the party in the woods on Friday night. Now, I had never been to the party in the woods on Friday night, but it sounded to me something that I would like, especially because I was not allowed to go to the woods. I was told not to hang out with that kid. So I said, of course, I want to go to the party on the woods. And here's the truth: my life changed that night. My life changed because of four things. There was a bonfire in the woods. I'd never been to a bonfire in the woods. There was Black Sabbath in the woods. At that time, every group of kids had a rich friend who had a boom box with like six speakers and double cassette. There was Sabbath in the woods. There were girls in the woods, and there was alcohol in the woods. And the truth is, my story, life story, other kids in junior high, they wanted to be in the yearbook as the most likely to succeed, the most likely to go to Ivy League school, the most likely to play in professional sports or whatever. I didn't need any of that. Maybe my curse is I'm way too shallow. I don't know. Could be. I knew within 3 months of that first night in the woods that if the best my life got was a bonfire in the woods, girls, Black Sabbath, and alcohol, that my life would be fine. That's all I needed. Now, I didn't dress with this pathetic golf little attire I have on tonight at that time, okay? I wore the same thing every day in junior high. I wore black engineer boots, Levi dungarees or corduroys, some kind of heavy metal t-shirt, sometimes a thermal shirt under it if it was the winter. I had a Levi dungaree jacket with an Ozzy Diary of a Madman oil painting on the back of it. And I would put a pack of cigarettes down the front of my pants as I went to school. And when I went to junior high, they put me in all these special classes with adjectives before the name of the subject: accelerated math, enriched science. And I don't know, again, another disclaimer in case I insult anyone. There's just not a lot of kids in the woods in accelerated math, okay? When I looked around accelerated math, it was not the people in the woods that I hung out with. And I wound up getting kicked out of all those classes. And, I'm not a big fan of the word progression. There's a lot of things about modern day AA I'm not a big fan of. Let's just put it that way. I do not believe my disease is out in the parking lot or the driveway doing push-ups right now. I believe my God is so powerful that I can't use that disease as some excuse to be a victim for the rest of my life. I believe that I've been introduced to a way in the big book to, even for as failed and imperfect a person as I am, to find a way that enables me to be happily and usefully whole to the best of my ability. And the word progression, it just drives me crazy. Like, I'm as alcoholic today as I was then. Here's my progression as a chronic teenage alcoholic. By the time I was in ninth grade, the only thing I thought about on a Monday morning is, where are we hanging out Friday night? Who has fake ID? Whose brother or sister can get us what we need? Whose parents are away on vacation so we can have a party at their house? That's all I thought. By the time I was in 10th grade, life changed a little bit because I had a discovery. See, I couldn't make it to Friday night anymore. Friday night might as well have been next summer. Like, I need to drink by Wednesday, preferably Tuesday. And I'm so grateful for a judge I met when I was 14 years old. Um, I got a petition filed against me by my school district. I had to go to juvenile court, again with the social worker, again with my mother, now just a juvenile prosecutor. But I made a decision that day. And it always reminds me, I spoke at a young people's conference this weekend, and I just said, if you run into someone who tells you that you can't be an alcoholic when you're a teenager, just run away from them. They're a lunatic. They're not armed with the facts. They're talking about something that has nothing to do with what Dr. Silkworth talks about. But when I was 14 years old, again, I'm dating myself. If you're in my generation, close to it, older than it, you probably remember that one day a week, there was a show called the After School Special. And the After School Special was always about some tragic member of the family. The degenerate gambler uncle, the bulimic aunt, the anorexic daughter, the junkie son, the alcoholic husband, whatever. And what had become very popular is contracts with your parents. And it's funny because I'm sitting in my kitchen looking at my refrigerator. The judge asked me, What would I like? Would I like to go to a juvenile correctional facility where we wouldn't have to worry about me going to school because school is inside the juvenile correctional facility? Or I could have a contract with my mother. And what's really important about that day in my life, there's two things that are really important. See, I had not been institutionalized yet, so I didn't have any real life experience. So I couldn't go with the juvenile correctional facility because I was scared I wouldn't be able to drink. Petrified. Like, you're going to send me someplace I can't drink? I'll go with the contract with my crazy Al-Anon mother. I'll go on the contract. And what's crazy is today, because I knew I was tough enough to go into a juvenile correctional facility, I was just scared I couldn't drink. Today, I am not tough enough to be an inmate again. But if I was, because I am institutionalized now, I know that I can safely get drunk in any prison or jail in America. I just didn't know that at 14 years old. And the other thing that's important about that date and why I've been committed to AA service for a lot of years is I've ran into lunatics in AA who tell me that young people can't be alcoholics. But somebody whispered in that judge's ear that a young boy or girl might come in his courtroom and they might have a problem with drinking. They might be an alcoholic. Because on that list of, my mother came home and she took the contract and she put it on the refrigerator with a Jesus magnet, right? Hopefully that have some kind of prayer power, right? On the contract. And take out the garbage, be home on time, honor curfew, don't smoke. And the last one was go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new, I just want to tell you AA is an amazing place. Things happen here that do not happen anywhere else on earth. When I was 17 years old, 3 years in and out of AA, I got caught smoking in the high school locker room again. Not a big deal, not a new occurrence. The hall lady took me to the principal's office. I got detention for a week again, not a big deal. You know what is a big deal? 2 weeks later, at the Friday night AA meeting, that hall lady gave me a cigarette. Think about that for a second. The same lady who took me to the principal's office is now giving me a cigarette at my Friday night meeting. Like, she knew the traditions long before I did. She knew at high school, she's a hall lady. At the Friday night meeting, she's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wish that I had learned that there's only two kinds of people in the world that are important for people like us. There's people who could drink and people who can't drink. And I'm a person who can't drink. The problem is we have a chapter in the book called More About Alcoholism. And people who are in the category of can't drink will do anything to convince themselves that they're in the category that can drink. I say to people all the time, we all throw around the vernacular friend to bills. You might be in the supermarket or the gym and you hear somebody use some lingo and you're like, are you a friend of Bill's? But truthfully, for me, I'm more interested if you're a friend of Fred and Jim. Do you have an intimate relationship with Fred and Jim in the chapter More About Alcoholism? Do you really understand what they're talking about there? Because I didn't for a long time. I always thought that some external thing was causing my drinking. I spoke somewhere and one of the other speakers on the panel got upset with me, but It's kind of like me in junior high. I felt like he started it. That was my response. You started it. You spoke first and said this nonsense. What did you expect me to do? But he got to the podium and he went through his trigger list that he goes over with his sponsees. And I couldn't help myself. I said, do you have on that list that whatever you do not have a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon? Because in the book that I love, it tells me one of the biggest triggers in the world for a person like me is for everything to be great. It's just incredible. And, you know, when you have an Al Anon mother, it's difficult. And when I speak at an AA convention, I can point out to you in the audience people I've never met, mostly mothers, who I can tell they're an Al Anon mother. They have a son or daughter. I can tell by the reaction of their face if their son or daughter is sober or if they're praying every night, like my mother. And so when you have an Al Anon mother, the only way you can manipulate her is with AA. That's it. Because more than anything else in the world, an Al Anon mother wants a sober son or daughter, more than anything in the world. So I was grounded one day. I'm 16 years old, and I couldn't stay in the house any longer. And I told my mother, I said, Mom, I heard about this big AA anniversary night. Everybody's going, Mom. I really want to go. And so, of course, any Al Anon mother is like, of course, I'll drive you. And I wouldn't even let her drop me off in the parking lot because I'm too cool to get out of my mother's car. But, I went down the stairs of that meeting on Long Island. I've been a coffee drinker since I've been in AA, since I've been 14 years old. I've been a coffee drinker. um, I got a cup of coffee and lit a cigarette. And this old lady was chairing the meeting and she turned the lights down halfway. She was like 34, maybe. This old guy came in with a sheet cake with candles on it, and all these lunatics started singing happy birthday. He was like 40. But if you're new, here's what I have to stress. I can't take you through the big book in an hour. You got to do that one-on-one in the backyard or a kitchen table or outside your AA clubhouse, wherever. But I can tell you that it's not natural for me to admit I'm wrong. I've paid the price for that many times in sobriety. But that night I sat in that meeting at 16 years old and thought to myself, 26, 36, 46, like, even if I live 30 years, this is going to be my big night out of the month. The big Friday night anniversary meeting with the old lady and the lights down halfway and the singing happy birthday. And I had a lot better things planned for me. And if you knew, I just want to tell you, I was wrong. I thought you wanted to rip the party away, take away my life. I've been given the greatest life somebody like me could ever get. I've ridden my motorcycle through all the mountains that the United States and Canada have to offer. I've seen Metallica over 50 times live and other heavy metal bands. I've been to so many concerts. I've seen the Yankees win the World Series. And guess what? I was there for the third out of the ninth inning. That's not a big deal to regular people. But I'll tell you how I usually go to events with a lot of people. The moral of the story is I'm always minding my own business, if you ask me. So I'm minding my own business and I hear a commotion behind me and I look over and I see a guy in a yellow windbreaker with other guys in yellow windbreakers who's talking to someone who's pointing at me. And then they come over to me and ask me to come down into the middle of the aisle of whatever stadium I'm at. Then I got to go to the security office and have a Polaroid picture taken and sign a trespass form promising I'll never come back there. So it's not a big deal to other people, but that's a pretty big deal to me. And my relationship with alcohol and my reaction to alcohol is so abnormal. I'm admitting this and it's embarrassing, but I was 40 years old and 16 years sober before I found out that the rest of the world thinks drinking a six pack in one night is excessive. I didn't know that. But to the rest of the world, six beers in one night is insanity. And I think about that because when I was a senior in high school, I had to see the school psychologist one day a week for an hour to stay in school. And Dr. Pavi was a good guy and it helped me out. And I remember one time, 17 years old, I looked right at him and I said, "You know what, Dr. Pavi? This weekend, I'm only going to have a six on Friday night and a six on Saturday night." And I thought I deserved a Congressional Medal of Honor. My relationship with alcohol is totally distorted. So let me tell you this: age 14 to 17, juvenile probation. Age 17 to 23, adult probation or in custody on a violation of probation. I'm not going to write a book, mostly because I've made fun of too many people in AA who write their own books. Um, but if I was going to write a book, there would be a chapter called "If You're Still Drinking, Don't Take Probation and Do the Time." I can't be on probation when I'm drinking. I'm the worst probationer in the history of probation. So 17 to 23, adult probation, in custody, violations of probation. 23 to 26, the sentenced inmate, lost my license for so long. The correctional facility I was in had good AA, not jail AA, not prison AA, just real decent literature-based AA. A miracle happened when I was inside there. I know I'm dating myself, but I was allowed to have a Walkman. It's this little square box you could listen to cassettes on. And the outside AA people brought in speaker tapes, like the old tapes, the cassette tapes. And for whatever reason, one day I picked up a tape and it said Tom I, Aberdeen, North Carolina. And I went back to my cot, and that week I listened to his tape and was a man who is now 30 years sober. He was the first convicted felon in the history of the United States to become the warden of a maximum custody penitentiary. That tape gave me the hope that I needed. It really did give me the hope that I needed. You know, I've had no place to live sober. There's a lot of useful things we learn that are really not useful to the rest of the world, but to people like us, they're very useful. Like I'm an expert at relighting a cigarette that somebody else has put out and stepped on. That's not a real valuable trait in the rest of the world. But if you live like we live, in New York City, they used to have these bougie hotels with sand ashtrays in front of the elevator. Those are the best cigarettes to relight. You know what alcoholics I identify with? People who are ramen noodle expert chefs. And I'm not talking about like Whole Foods gourmet ramen noodles. I'm talking about the like plastic package that looks like a brick of heroin that has a little like pouch inside that you cut open and you stir in the water to change the color. Like I know what it's like to live for $1 a day. I also want to tell you about when I met Joe and Charlie. You see, I went to a taper and I said, "Do you know this guy, Tom I?" And he looked at me like I was crazy. He's like, "Everybody knows Tom I." I said, "I need to talk to him." And so he gave me his number, old school, at his office. That night, might as well have been the night before Christmas, and I was 5 years old. Like I stayed up all night. I couldn't wait to call Tom. I said, "Thanks for saving my life." He said, "I didn't save your life. AA did. You have a debt you can never repay." I got very active in service, and I got very active because I went to a Joe and Charlie Big Book workshop. Now, if you hate AA as much as I do, not only do you hate AA, but there's about three people in each meeting that you hate more than everybody else. The real ringleaders of the passionate, over the top AA members. You go to a Joe and Charlie Big Book workshop in 1993, every person I hated for 100 miles was in that hotel. And you know what I figured? You can still hear me, right? Here's the moral of my story. That Sunday afternoon when I left there, you know what I figured out? There was a commonality in all the people I hated in AA. They all believed in literature-based Alcoholics Anonymous. They all believed in embracing the program that at that time had worked for 60 years instead of coming here with 3 months and wanting to change it. I went to that same taper and I asked, I said, "Hey, at my big book group, nobody knows the traditions. And at the service assembly, it appears that no one works the steps. Is there anyone who does both?" He said, "Oh, you need to talk to Don P. in Colorado." And at the time, Don had brought the message of AA to Russia. And he was a trustee on the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I would go to Colorado on business, I would go to his crazy 6 a.m. Friday meeting. Um, you know, I'll end with this. Like, I've learned the hard way. You can try to avoid the steps. You can try to avoid keeping something secret that you shouldn't keep secret. It'll blow up in your face. Newcomers ask me, "How do you get a good life in AA, Billy?" I said, "Well, it's very simple. You just got to burn down and blow up your whole life." I said, "And then you're going to get a really good one. And it's going to get so good that you think you're immune from God's rules. You'll want to wonder just how much of this defect can I keep in my life and not drink. And then you're going to burn your life down sober again. And if you're lucky, by the power of God's grace and the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and good sponsorship, you won't pick up a drink. But it's not free. AA is not free, and it has nothing to do with money. We have a debt here we can never repay. The first thing in my life always has to be helping another alcoholic and Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything has to come behind that. So I wish everybody a great holiday season, whatever you celebrate. All I know about the holiday season is this is big recruitment time for Alcoholics Anonymous. There's more anniversaries in December, January, and February than any other time of the year. And that while I know Christmas is no different than New Year's, is no different than St. Patrick's Day, that's because I have a foundation in Alcoholics Anonymous. Newcomers who come in this time of year, they need our help more than ever. So thanks for having me out.